Parenting's hard, you don't know what to do. You're blaming your kids, but it's probably you. You love your kids and that you can trust. Just remember your kids don't suck.
Welcome to Your Kids Don't Suck, cultivating closeness with your children through non-coercive conscious parenting. We're your hosts, Kara Tedstone and Rythea Lee. Let's dive in and grow together.
All right, welcome back to Your Kids Don't Suck, and we're so grateful for everyone who's listening and anyone who's listening. Thank you. And today we have a wonderful guest, and her name is Dayna Martin. This is Rythea talking, and Kara Tedstone, my co-host, is also here. And Dayna Martin, I'm going to read her bio and tell you how I know her. She feels like a friend through the internet, but it's become like a heart person to me. Dayna Martin is a mother of four, an advocate, speaker, educator, and author of 3 books about birth and radical unschooling. Dayna has been featured on the Dr. Phil Show, CNN, Nightline, The Jeff Probst Show, ABC's hit show Wife Swap, Fox News, 60 Minutes, and The Bethany Show. She was used as an informational resource for homeschooling stories on the Discovery Channel, The Today Show, and Our America on the OWN network, and the Oprah Winfrey Show. Oh my gosh. She travels the world helping families change their lives by changing their parenting paradigm to bring more peace and connection to their lives with their children. Dayna is a featured speaker at the major parenting and educational conferences worldwide. Welcome, Dayna.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, you've been busy in your life. Besides raising 4 children, which is, a resume all its own. So,
yes.
So I'm just going to say how I know you, then I'm going to let you, say more. So before I even knew the words non-coercion, I mean, that's like, that's new to my life in some ways. And I was just trying to parent as best as I could as kind of a playful parent who was a trauma survivor, who is a trauma survivor. I came upon your book, Dayna, Radical Unschooling, and it really blew my socks off. And of course, as many people probably tell you, I was just like, that's nuts. I could never, ever do that. That's way beyond. And yet I couldn't stop being drawn to it over and over again. I'd be like, there's something there. So you were like the seeds in the beginning of entertaining the idea that maybe I could not control and punish and shame my child. You were the beginning of that, which is somehow like completely flowered into this whole life's journey for me, this life's work that I'm doing now, helping parents. So also Dayna did coaching with me, and was often when I talked to you, Dayna, you were like, you would say something that absolutely no one else was saying. You would say things like, well, you have to trust your kid. And I'd be like, nobody agrees with you. Nobody thinks I should trust my kid. What are you talking about? But it would feel so right. And then I did Dayna support groups online, and there were just so many brave parents just diving into some of it was unschooling and some of it was just trying to be loving to their children. And you would help this huge range of parenting issues. So anyway, thank you for being a seed, really important seed.
Thank you. Thank you for being part of my life as a coaching client and as a friend. Later, we met for the first time, I think 5 years ago, right around this time of year. You came to Miami and I met you and your daughter, and it was such a nice time on the beach. I think we were the only ones on the beach. It was a freezing day, but yeah, I'm really grateful for our connection, and I'm so impressed with all you've done with your work.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So what do you think about this term non-coercive collaborative parenting? How does it connect with you and where you're at?
Well, it's interesting. Before social media, so I've been advocating for about 24 years. I have 4 kids. They are 16, 19, 23 almost, and 25. So back in the day, there was Yahoo groups, and that's how everybody connected in this scene. And there was a group, there was two unschooling groups. I started a radical unschooling group, and then there was one called consensual non-coercive parenting. And it was a group that it was the first time I ever really heard that term.
Hmm.
And it was completely in alignment with the philosophy of radical unschooling. They go hand in hand. I think that radical unschooling is a twofold philosophy. It's both education and parenting, and the non-coercive parenting Yahoo group I learned a lot from. And we just were kind of just different labels for the same philosophy, basically. Yeah, so I'm really happy more and more people are coming to it, because sometimes the term radical unschooling can put people off. They think it's not educating, or it's really permissive or neglectful. And I think that coming at it from the angle of non-coercive parenting is opening up people more to the idea that wouldn't have been.
Right. And also, lots of people are schooling. So they think, oh, that's not for me because my kid's in school. The end. They
Right,
don't see it as an opening.
right, exactly. And
Yeah.
you can be radical unschooling with children in school, actually, which kind of blows people's minds to hear. It has to do with respecting a child's choice.
Yeah.
Will you say more about that?
Sure. Yeah. I think that a lot of people think radical unschooling or unschooling is anti-school. And it's more about children's rights and children's freedom to choose. That a child who chooses school and a child that's forced in school is two totally different experiences. So radical unschooling, and personally, I don't come at it from an anti-school mentality. It's more, I mean, there are a lot of crazy things that have happened, obviously, in schools, especially in the last 5-10 years compared to when my kids 25 years ago. But I do feel that children that choose school and have the freedom to leave and have a parent on the side of the child's freedom can use school like you would a library. And I think that having schools as a resource center like a library, where children can choose to go or not, where they're free to leave when they want to, where they can opt out of homework, I think that it can be especially for children when they're an only child, can be really beneficial if they want to meet friends and connect in that way. But it's hard sometimes to balance with a really strict school when a parent goes in saying, no, I don't want my child to have to do homework. They might be up against a lot, but more and more parents are doing that.
I love what you're saying, because I have a toddler, so she's 2, she turned 2 in May. And a lot of people come to me and say like, oh, I've heard you on the podcast, or, you've kind of mentioned that you're going to send your daughter to school. And that's the idea, but she's 2.5. So I'm really taking that view of like, I'm not sure. The goal is right now, logistically, to go to the school in our neighborhood, but I have no idea how that's going to go. I mean, that's what's happening kind of like down the pipeline, because that's what's going on around us, but I really don't know. And so I like to hear you say sort of like, it's not all or nothing, and it doesn't have to be even in the planning. Like, you can certainly have an idea of your family life and how it's going to go, but there's ways to figure it out if it's not working for you. And for me, I have no idea if it's going to work for her, if it's going to work for me. And I really like prioritizing this idea that it's going to be her choice. I'm going to really be considering her feedback. I mean, it's the only way for me.
Yeah, I like that. I can remember before I had kids, when I moved to my little town, I drove by the school and said, oh, this is such a cute little school. My kids will be going there. Just thinking that in my mind, seeing all the resources. And once I had my first child, who's 25 now, I can remember he didn't want to go. And I'm like, all right, well, you don't have to.
Yeah.
Little did I that would lead me to this whole path. But it didn't make sense for me. If my son wanted to be with me during the day and I wanted to be with him, it didn't make sense to send him.
Yeah.
And so that was the first decision that led me down this road. My children have always had the freedom to go to school or not. Always. They've always known school exists. They know the type of schools we had, everything from Waldorf to Montessori to public school. They've always chosen to be home. But that's not the same in every household. So some people people will write to me and say, like, I don't want my child to go to school. How do I keep them from going? And I'm like, well, you came to the wrong person, because I'm more about respecting your children's choices and explaining to them without fear, honestly, what it might be like, and telling them they can try it and come back if they're not happy. And yeah. So I understand where you're at for sure.
Yeah. Will you say a little bit more? Oh, sorry, Rythea, go ahead.
Well, but Dana, you must have hundreds and hundreds of people say to you, that's not a choice we can make in our house financially. Like, that's a class issue. We don't have the finances to have a choice. My kid cannot come home. We have to work, and that's just how it is. That's how most people feel when I talked about it.
Yeah. Sometimes that does happen, but I think the more people that are giving their children the choice, and the more people that are unschooling and there's a lot more opportunities for people to have co-ops and to watch each other's children. And there's ways to make it work. I mean, I have more single mothers coming to me than, solo parents in general coming to me than any other group right now. And they're
Really?
making it work. Yes. So I know it's not always possible, but I started a program a while ago to train nannies and care providers in this philosophy. So even if you have to send your child to daycare or school, you can find one that's more in alignment with the philosophy of non-coercive parenting.
Just really thinking outside the box when it comes to like, how can I make sure that I'm advocating for what my child really wants and still making a living for myself, providing for my kid financially, like all those things have to happen, of course, but we're trying to widen the scope.
Right. And to ask ourselves the questions, how can I send my child somewhere where they're going to be respected in their choices, where they're not going to be punished, where they're not going to be controlled? These are the questions. We don't want our children to be oppressed and treated as less than and hurt through authoritarian dynamics. So I've seen it happen over the last couple of years. More and more people are offering options like that. And so if you're somebody who provides care to children, whether you're a daycare provider or you have an alternative school, you'd be on the leading edge of human rights to educate yourself about how to live in partnership with kids and how to not punish them, what to do instead of detention and what to do instead of grounding. And like all of these alternatives, you are going to be much more appealing to a really evolved group of parents looking for help.
Yeah, Dayna, your Facebook group has how many people in it?
Close to 40,000.
That's so amazing. Just from all over the world, or?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an active group. People are so into it.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's hard to keep up with. It's pretty self-governing, I guess we could say. There's not a lot of moderation in the group, so things tend to be fairly peaceful, but sometimes people don't really understand the philosophy, and you tend to get trolls in Facebook groups. So I've had my Facebook group since 2011, and I've got a lot of members from all over the world because I've spoken in India and China and Australia. I've traveled all over speaking about this philosophy. So we have a great melting pot there. But I did start a private radical unschooling group because there were so many. It's hard to keep up with the trolls and people. You don't have privacy necessarily on Facebook. So
Right.
it's a great resource, but starting my private group was kind of to eliminate the negatives.
I see.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, Dayna, if you would say more a little bit about like your personal journey to unschooling and just this way of parenting yourself. Like, did it happen when your kid was born?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I gave birth to my son, Devin, in the hospital. And I had a natural birth, which I wanted to do, but didn't think I was capable of. And I did it, and it was incredible. And I can remember just sobbing as I was holding him. First time you have a baby, as you know, when they're first put in your arms, you can't believe that was really inside you. You knew it, but it was like this concept until you were holding them. You were like, whoa, my gosh, there was a human there. And to have birthed him naturally was really empowering for me. And as I was holding him for the first time, within, I'd say, a couple hours of his birth, the nurses came running in the hospital room and turned on the TVs, and the Columbine shootings were happening live. And it was crazy. It was the first time there was ever a school shooting that I had ever heard of. And I'm holding him, and like there's women crying and children jumping out of windows. And it was a very emotional experience for me. And I remember thinking for the first time, like, how many of those parents and children would have preferred to have been home together that day, but didn't know they could, or didn't have the courage, or were forced by authorities to stay separate. And how many of those kids would have wanted to do what they wanted to do that day instead of being forced to learn these like school subjects instead of pursuing their passions. And my mind just started then in that moment. And it's when I decided then and there that my children would always have the freedom to choose school or not. So I didn't come at this from an anti-school out of fear that my children would get shot mentality. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, they're never going. No, it was more like, wow, like I want my kids to have the choice. And I'm not sure why that was put in my mind that day, but that's what unfolded. My kids always did have the choice. A lot of school shootings have happened since then. I can't believe it. It was like a lot of them about 15 years ago. And I'm just really grateful that I had the strength to be able to parent this way, because I was raised really traditionally. I was so shy, so insecure. so concerned with what other people thought of me because I didn't realize at the time, but I was conditioned to be that way. I remember when I brought Devin home from the hospital, my mother-in-law came down to greet us, and I was holding him, and she said, "Oh, you shouldn't. What are you holding him for so much? You need to put him down. You need to get used to him taking care of himself and self-soothing."
Right away, right after he was born?
Yes. Yeah. Within hours of me being home. And I can remember, my thought, funny, but I'm sure you guys can relate. My thought was that, ooh, she's going to think I'm a bad mother if I don't listen to her. And I need her to love me and approve of me. So I put him down in the bassinet, this like family bassinet that had been passed down for like 100 years or something insane. That meant so much to her, And so she left, and he started crying, and she left. And I ran over and picked him up, and I said, "I'll never ever do that to you again. I'm so sorry, sweetie." And I never did. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I'm either choosing my child or other people thinking I'm a great mom. Yeah. And I'm choosing my child. And it was like this deconditioning happened to me then, but it was painful because we're so conditioned, especially as women, to please others, and we want to do what they think we should do in order to love ourselves. And so it's like this whole process begun for me where I wanted other women to feel supported because I knew how little support there was because I had no support. So I became a childbirth teacher and a doula, and I started from that point. And I became a Rythea Lee leader and attachment parenting. That's another kind of label for non-coercive parenting, I guess, from the early years is attachment parenting. Yeah. And I just started supporting people as I went. So as my children grew, so did my advocacy in the areas that it touched. So it became very natural and organic for me. I think it was probably 18, how old is Ivy? It was 18 years ago that the doctor, and this is before social media too. So somebody posted in one of the Yahoo groups, I think it was the non-coercive parenting one, Dr. Phil is looking for homeschoolers. And I'm like, I'll just fill it out. What the heck? I filled it out, put that I was a radical unschooler, what the philosophy was. Did not think another thing of it. Never did in a million years did I think I'd be called to be on the show. But a month later, the phone rang and it was them. And they said, "We want to come to your house tomorrow and film your family for 12 hours. Are you okay with that?" And wow. I'm like, "Well, okay, sure." I checked with my kids first, of course. Said, "Do you guys mind?" And they were like, "No, we'll do it." And I said, "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. If you don't want to be on camera, it's fine." Like anything I've ever done in the media, and I've done a lot. My kids always had the freedom to choose. And in some interviews, you'll see that my daughter, Tiffany, who's very highly sensitive, isn't in some of them because she didn't want to be. Devin always loved it. Ivy always loved it. Tiffany, sometimes. So, and so we were on the show, and I wasn't expecting to be. I wasn't expecting him to come at me like he did. And I didn't even know we'd be on stage with Dr. Phil. They told us we just might be part of the show. So I thought we'd be like in the audience and be asked a few questions, but they put us up in a hotel and they started doing hair and makeup. And I heard one of the stylists say to the other one, "Oh, the unschoolers are going to be on stage with Dr. Phil." And I'm like, "Excuse me, that's me." And they were like, "Oh, sorry." I'm like, wow, okay, what am I going to do? And I can remember sitting backstage and hearing they made this whole montage, like beginning opening of me and my family and what radical unschooling was. And I remember thinking, I'm going to run. I'm not doing this. No way I can do this. I mean, keep in mind, guys, like I've been advocating for a long time. So me sitting with you now is pretty comfortable, but it was the hardest thing I could ever do in my life to go on that show. But I did it, and I didn't do the best interview, that I wasn't an advocate then. I just was answering questions that were kind of trick questions. But the fact is I showed up and I did it. So if you're somebody listening and you want to advocate for this life, you don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to show up and do the best you can, because that's all I did over the years was answer the questions the best I could. Said yes to every single opportunity that came my way without fear. Yes, I got criticized over the years. Yes, I got a lot of hate, but I just kept going and kept doing it. And, I think that's something that has really healed a lot of the past conditioning that I had living in the authoritarian dynamic that many of us live in. So that's part of the answer of your question. Before I knew it, I was advocating all over the place.
Whenever I see clips of you that you've shown, like when we did the support group, you showed some clips of you on these shows. Yeah. You were just totally amazing.
Yeah.
You would just speak truth to power, like you said, like just the best you can. You were not fake.
Yeah.
You were not like you didn't have special language, but you always made these very searing points
Mhm.
Mhm.
that were kind of uh almost like unmistakable, like, whoa, that's truth. That is the truth. I remember when I would see them, I'd be like, I wonder if I could ever do that. you know.
Sometimes I don't know how I do it. I just don't. And every single time I second guess. I always give myself the freedom to run if I want to.
Yeah.
But it's really second nature to me. The answers, they just come really second nature. And I think part of advocating for something so radical is that you have to have compassion for the people that don't get it and that are criticizing you. And that took me a while to get to. You know, it was painful at first to feel judged. And,
Mm.
you know, you see when you're on TV, you're getting a lot of negative comments. People would say the craziest things about me and my kids.
Yeah.
And eventually I realized that there is this process to acceptance, and somebody has to be kind of on the front lines being willing to be thought of as crazy. That's the first step in accepting a new philosophy, a new paradigm. There has to be the brave people that are willing to be looked at as crazy, because the next stage of acceptance is acceptance. And
Mm.
so I'm willing to be the one that stands there and people look at and think my kids will grow up to be nothing. Now my kids are adults now, all except one. So now not only am I coming at it from a philosophical perspective of knowing that they're going to be okay, but they really are. So now I could say, you are all wrong. Has anybody come back and apologized to me? No, but that's okay.
Right.
Yeah. Like Dr. Phil, he told me my kids would never amount to anything basically, but
He said
he was,
that.
yeah, in so many words. You know, all the interviewers really did.
So
So,
he was very attacking and negative and critical.
well, I mean, I softened him somehow, I think, just because he knew I was nervous and that I wasn't expecting it to be on stage with him. So I think he did soften toward the end. And he was saying like, I have to watch the interview again, but he would say, well, you know, if it works for you, but your children need to have the freedom to go to school. And I'm like, oh, they do. And he's like, oh, like everything he'd say, a lot of the clips I didn't show because it kind of made him feel a little dumb. I don't think he was prepared for it. I don't think he understood the philosophy fully. And he was just reading from a teleprompter. And so you're dealing with something totally different when it comes to the media. People are really invested in proving you wrong.
Right.
So if you know that going into it, I think that you need to make sure that you represent yourself and carry yourself in a peaceful way if you're representing a philosophy that is peaceful.
Mm.
And so I just remained calm, even though I got a little triggered sometimes.
Was
Yeah.
it hard for your kids? Like Tori and I made an Instagram video that like went viral recently. Like 1 million people watched it. And everybody was criticizing her. So she went and read all the comments and she was like, I'm not making another video with you, Mom. I'm like, yeah, really, it's really hard. I said, it's good for you to see the reality of how reactive everybody is. You know, I wanted her to see it because she wants to be an influencer. So it was important for her to see this is part of it. This is
Yeah.
part of being an influencer, but it was hard for her.
Yeah. Yeah. When we were on the show Wife Swap, Tiffany, it was, I don't know if you saw the episode, but
I
the other
did.
mom.
You played it for us in your group.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
I
Yeah.
watched it too.
Oh, you did? Oh,
I
great.
did. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Tiffany could read, but they played it. They had to show something negative from our side because there was so much negative to show from the other side.
Oh,
And so she didn't like that they said she couldn't read. And that was like the biggest criticism because she could. And so she wasn't happy with even to this day, people will comment to her, do you know how to read yet? You know, she's 20, almost 23. She's like, yes. And I could read then. It's just, I didn't like being put on the spot with 14 people in my kitchen with cameras. You know, it was intense.
right.
And so my kids have always kind of learned to laugh it off. I remember after the Dr. Phil show, the message boards went for about 2.5 years. It was the longest running message board ever in Dr. Phil history. And they said that my kids were going to grow up to be cannibals. So it was like this family joke for even to this day about that. But it is painful. It's painful. It was painful for me to be criticized sometimes and to be misunderstood. So if you are an advocate and your kids want to put themselves out there, the first response to that kind of criticism is exactly what your daughter had, is to feel I don't want to do this again. But then you do, you try it again and you get used to it. But I think talking about it and sharing that they don't fully understand the philosophy that they're judging, they're going on a very limited part of it. And so without full understanding that it looks different to them. But yeah, I'm sorry that happened to Tori.
I mean, I'm learning. I haven't been really hated yet or attacked very much yet. A little bit, someone will go off, but like I just like, oh, they're triggered. you
Yeah.
know, like their
Mhm.
stuff is up. Like I'm triggering their stuff. So far
Yeah.
I'm doing okay with it. Because
Good.
I'm a therapist, so I know like when people have to attack other people and say mean things, like they're just triggered out of their minds, or like
Mhm.
yeah, some people are vicious, and then you just erase it and delete it and block it. You know what I mean? Like I'm doing okay so far. I definitely have a fear of it. It's very scary. And
Mm.
I also feel absolutely driven to continue. So it's like I'm just gonna have
Yeah.
to keep working with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can't make a difference in this world and not get that. You can't have one without the other. So it's this
Right.
matter of acceptance and making peace with it. And for me to have compassion for other people and just has been helpful. I wasn't a therapist starting. I was just a young mom. So in the beginning, it was really hard for me. I wasn't in this space I am now, but it was just, there was many times I said, I can't do this anymore
Yeah.
in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I would work really hard to, think of the perfect comeback or the right thing to say. And
Right.
over time, you just get so used to it that you're just like, okay, this is the way it is. Because when I started, the internet was new. I mean, I got the internet in 1998 and it was 1999 that I had Devin. So the internet was new and trolls and haters and all of that was like so foreign. We were still in like a whole different mentality about criticism.
Hey.
So it hurt in the beginning. Then after a while, you're like, okay, that's the internet. That's how it is.
So Dana, what's happening with your work right now? Like, well, I know you're in this big moment with your son.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so right now I'm in the hospital and I have been for a month. My son Orion, my youngest, is having spinal fusion surgery at the end of the month. And right now he's in something called halo gravity traction. He has very severe scoliosis and the halo gravity traction straightens his spine, but it's a long process before the main surgery. So here I'm basically here with him and taking care of him. My older kids, my adult children are at home, running everything at home, which is such a godsend. I'm so glad that Orion's unschooled because he's missing, obviously, if he was in school, he'd be missing like 2 months of school. And kids that have gone through this and they get that behind, it is so horrible for them to have that stress. Orion's doing the same thing he did at home, but here. He has his piano here. We moved his piano. The doctors and nurses think it's amazing that we've moved his keyboard piano here. He has his computers here, and he's not missing a beat as far as any kind of schoolwork because he's unschooled. So he's continuing to learn, and that's something also really interesting I have to point out about this life because he'll be studying. Right now he's studying ancient Greek just by choice, and the nurses came in, and one of them said to him like, "Oh, what are you studying for?" And he kind of was like, "What?" And I said, "Oh, he's studying because he wants to learn it." They're like, "Not for a test?" I'm like, "No, no." They're like, "Oh, okay." So there's this whole shift in understanding just by his medical team of like, wow, this kid's learning all these things because he wants to. And so learning about like being somebody who's living in a space of non-coercive parenting and freedom to choose and to respect your children, it's kind of opening people's minds in a way that I've never seen before here in the hospital. So it's kind of cool in that way. As far as my work and my advocacy, I coach parents. It's what I do mainly, but I also run a private group. It's at radicalunschoolling.com where we have group coaching once a week and I do live streams and I'm doing a lot of writing right now. So I'm planning on writing another book about the teen years.
Uh-huh.
Excited about that.
I was wondering, Dana, if you would give sort of an overview. I have a lot of friends who are young parents and they are probably thinking of the word unschooling as some horrible reality where the kids are wild and feral and stupid. and don't learn anything and are neglected by the parents because the parents are lazy. I really am sad to say that I do think that that's what comes to mind just through conversations I've had with people. And I often don't even really go there.
I also told you not to go there.
Rythea tells me not to go there because because then you get into a whole maybe debate or conversation with people who aren't really open and they're not really asking because they're not curious. So I tread very lightly around those types of conversations. I would love for you to speak to what it really is and like give an overview of I guess how it looks or a synopsis for people who really, really don't understand it.
Okay. Well, I understand the term unschooling can be off-putting for people because they think it's uneducating. And I think that there are probably a lot of people that say they're unschooling that probably are neglectful, or I've seen that happen, definitely. And sadly, it gives it a bad name. However, unschooling itself, so there's unschooling, which is focused on education. And unschooling is not doing school. It's not uneducating. So that's an important distinction to make. And unschoolers kind of reprioritize in their family what matters, and education happens as a side effect of living a rich, full life together. So it's a twofold philosophy. There's the parenting side, which is falling into peaceful parenting, non-coercive parenting. It's living in partnership with your kids as opposed to the traditional authoritarian paradigm. So 99% of parents will live in the authoritarian paradigm. They're controlling their kids. They're focused on behavior modification and obedience and compliance. That's the main focus and role of parenting. And that's how most parents are trained to train their kids. But what unschooling is letting go of all of those ideas and living in partnership, focusing on the needs under your child's behavior. And instead of focusing in the authoritarian paradigm on just the parents' needs solely for quiet, uninterrupted sleep, obedience, compliance, we focus on the children's needs just as much as the parents' needs. So it's valuing children as much as you do adults. Now, most people, if they were asked if they discriminated against children, they would say, oh, never, no, but they don't realize how the entire paradigm is so discriminatory and so disrespectful. And so when you're focusing on the children's needs also, sometimes people get confused and they're so used to one person being in control, controlling another, that they'll just flip the whole script and put children in the role of the authority. And they'll actually ask their children permission to do things like, do you mind if I take a shower? Can I do this? Can I do that? And that doesn't work either. That's not what I'm talking about. But because people are so used to, like, they'll just invert the authoritarian dynamic, and they might try it like that for a while, not really fully understanding, and it'll fail. They'll be sad, they'll be miserable, their children will be unhappy, they will be. And so what I like to help parents understand is what unschooling is. It's valuing your needs as much as the needs of your child, and taking responsibility to meet your own needs, not forcing your children to meet your needs, taking care of your own needs and taking responsibility for yourself in a way maybe you haven't before, at the same time facilitating your children's needs and their learning. So this is not for the lazy parent. This is actually, it's the authoritarian dynamic of control and rules is way lazier. Trust me. It's very, to have rules in place of presence is the lazy way to go. It's the easy way to go. And so I think it's so important for people to understand that when they first hear about unschooling, they hear what we don't do. That's like the most sensationalized aspect in the media. Like no rules, no bedtime, no food, no food controls, they can use technology whenever they want. They don't hear how that's navigated. They just hear it when we're not controlling somebody. Mm-hmm. Most of us were raised to think that without control and punishments, we aren't loved. Like, how many times have we heard as kids that I'm doing this because I love you? This hurts me more than it hurts you. All of those statements made us believe that being hurt and punished and controlled were necessary if somebody loves us, and that if they didn't do those things, we were neglected. So there's a huge conditioning from the authoritarian dynamic to make us feel as though we are only loved if we're controlled. And that is not true. And so when people are saying, oh, that's neglectful, or they're just confused. They don't really fully understand it. And those of us walking this path know how long it's taken us to not only understand it philosophically, but to then apply it, which is like a whole other level of like work and letting go of ideas and deconditioning and healing. It takes a long time to really understand the philosophy fully. And we're even working on it to this day, 25 years later, with new instances where I'm like, I really need to rethink this. So to expect somebody when they just hear the term and to understand very little of it, for them to grasp it, it's hard. So when somebody says it's neglectful, there was a time that I thought it was too before I had kids. If somebody would have told me about this, I would have thought that's insane. Like, are you kidding me? Those poor kids. That's what I would have thought. So when we can meet people where they're at and we understand that that is how they're going to think to begin with, and we meet with a collaborative mindset of like, yeah, I thought that too. So here's what we do instead.
Yeah.
Well, what if you don't punish your child? What do? Well, we're present with them. We're talking to them. We're explaining things. We're their guide in this world. They need to understand these things, and we're there to explain it. We don't have to hurt somebody to get them to understand the way the world works. In fact, using punishments and control will damage them and make them do the total opposite just for wanting to feel free. And so it's so important for us to come at this with an understanding that this takes a long time to really grasp. And part of unschooling philosophy when it comes to our children is like, I don't believe in forced learning at all. I don't believe in threatening somebody in order for them to memorize or learn something that I think that they should know. True learning only comes from the internal motivation of the learner. And so I know that with my children, but I have to extend that outward. If somebody wants to learn about unschooling, I will, in a consensual dynamic, I will share it with them. But I will never force this philosophy or for somebody to learn about it. So if somebody's dead set on thinking I'm wrong and wanting to misunderstand me, which happens a lot, I'm not going to force this down their throat. I'll ask them, would you like me to share with you like what we do instead of this? Because I think you might misunderstand. And I totally get if you do. I did too in the beginning. So if we come at it in partnership, we can educate people about this. But with the internet, it's hard, isn't it? With people, because a lot of them just want to believe we're crazy.
And there's also not a dialogue, like with a comment or, a post or a blog post written about it. I mean, there's no dialogue. So yeah, collaboration is more difficult.
Yeah.
Well, I have little worlds now on TikTok and Instagram of like a lot of loving people who are really, really into it.
Yeah.
I'm so inspired by that. And I run these support groups also. And people are just absolutely eager and starving for the information. They're just like ready. They're just ready. They're just like sponges. I had a beginning of a group last night, of an 8-week group, and this mom was saying she has a little one, like 14 months, and she was saying everything I think and everything I want to do is coercive. I literally can't say anything because I just want to be like, put that there, don't do that, don't touch that, give me that, she's like, everything. So I don't talk, I just smile, sit there and smile. I said, that's fine. That's the transitional space where you're just going to have to sit and witness yourself for a while and see all your impulses before you do anything. That's absolutely valid, because you can't get to all new patterns until you dismantle the ones that you have inside of you. And
yeah. And I feel like that's where a lot of people, like with that one example, it's perfect, because people think that if we're not saying anything, that's neglectful, because they've thought in their mind that control means you're doing something, that you need to control everything. And so when we're present and we're just quiet observing, people might interpret that as being lazy, but it's not that at all. It's that we don't want to control. We want to like give them, traditional parenting is so, oh my gosh, there's so many layers of how screwed up it is. But why do you need to comment on every single thing your child does? Why is your judgment need to be on the forefront of everything? I remember once when my girls were little, they were 4 and 2, and Tiffany was pushing Ivy on the swing. And I remember they had matching outfits. It's back in the day where they didn't care what they wore, so I'd dress them similar. And I can remember looking out the back door, and they fought all the time. So seeing them get along, I was like opening the door to say, "Oh, you guys, that's so awesome," And I'm to continue that behavior. And I stopped myself and said, "Why am I going to like pull myself into this? Let them enjoy this moment. Why do they need to hear how mom judges this whole experience that they're doing to get more of that behavior that is so manipulative? Let them have this moment together." And so I remember shutting the door, and it was like this aha moment. Like, I don't need to sit and judge and let them know how I feel about every single thing they're doing, because that's going to condition them to want to please me. I don't need to tell them this pleases me. And so I remember that kind of that there's so many moments in my life that stand in my mind where I remember every detail of like how I had this aha awareness. And I really encourage parents to think before they speak and say, what is the intention of this comment right now? Is it to manipulate to get more of that positive behavior so you're pleased and your needs are met? Let them have their time, let them have their moments without us constantly judging and commenting on everything.
Well, this feels like a direct like segue into the education piece.
Mm.
So when you're unschooling and you're looking at what the learning is, can you say more about that? How that has to be the foundation of how you do the education piece, how you navigate it?
Yeah, so unschooling is based on the philosophy that true learning happens when kids are internally motivated based on their interests and their passions in life. And I don't look at myself as my child's teacher. I'm not standing in front of them, pouring knowledge into them as the all-knowing authority and grading and measuring and prying into their minds. I don't think that that's just to do that to a child. I think testing and quizzing and questioning is very unjust. And my children have never gone through that, luckily. And so unschooling learning is easy and it's like breathing. John Holt wrote books, How Children Learn and How Children Fail. He was a teacher back in the 1970s and he was a real pioneer for unschooling. He was the first person that coined the term in the 1970s. And his books were so eye-opening to me and so many others because he talks about what learning really is. So we've really confused learning in our culture to mean children getting good grades and obeying what you're saying, but really forced learning is more about obedience and compliance and conformity.
Right. Like I think it's learning is getting confused with performing.
Yes, exactly. And so true learning happens easily and joyfully for kids. And as parents, we need to facilitate that based on who they are and how they like to learn and what they want to do with their time. So unschooling has been what I've done from the beginning. It was just an extension of attachment parenting for me, non-coercive parenting, peaceful parenting. And I've been doing this for 25 years. And my children have learned everything that kids in school learn, if not more. Maybe not the exact things, because I don't believe that we're all put on the earth to learn the same things in life. And I think curriculums are very limiting and they keep kids dumbed down, as my mentor, John Taylor Gatto, said in his book, Dumbing Us Down. It keeps kids in a space of not being able to excel in certain areas. And so my kids they're grown now, 3 of them. Of course, they'll always be my babies, but they're all doing incredibly different things with their lives.
Yeah, hearing like a brief maybe look into like what it is to the education piece of like day to day, or to give parents an idea, because even for me, I hear about it and I know kind of the gist, but if I think about like what that would look like for me, I know that's a huge part of probably your work with parents directly. Like you help support them into figuring out what it is their kid might want to dive into. So maybe say a little bit more about that, what it looks like, what the coaching looks like for parents. How do parents do it? How do they start?
Well, I was coached, so I kind of like saying a little bit about something.
Yes, please.
Well, so many new parents, you're like really in your brain all the time. You're in your mind all the time going, is my kid supposed to be doing that? That's not right. They shouldn't be into that video game. Like they've been doing it for 3 months. Can't be right. They shouldn't still be doing Minecraft.
Yeah.
Or my kid isn't reading and all the other kids are, like all the comparing, all the stuff we're trained to make our child an object, then compare them with everyone else. And Dayna would always be like, trust your child, whatever she's doing, she needs to be doing because she's learning something, and just get in there with her. So I would join her world and it's, some people call it self-directed learning. I would follow her into her interests and passions, and we would do stuff for like long ass periods of time. And then other things were really short. And like Dayna, I remember telling on one of the calls, you would tell me stories about your kids where they would be so into something and you'd be like, this is how they're going to make a living. You'd be like, this is what they're going to be doing with their life. And then like a month later, like that was gone, and that because unschooled kids are allowed or given the space to get fully into something. Whereas kids at school often don't have the time. They can't do that unless they're in the dance classes and they have to do all the dance classes, and they don't get to really choose, because once they plug into a system, they have to do the system that way. Um, so in this lifestyle, the child gets to like really dig in and like either fully do it or be like, nah, I'm not into it, and then try something. I mean, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful to watch.
Yeah, they really get to take their time, and it's a whole life philosophy. It's how we were finally able to live once we were out of the system. Our kids get to live it now. They get to be children. Childhood in our culture, with this current dynamic is, and your childhood is in constant preparation for the future. It's such a future-based existence. And my kids have always been able to live in the present moment. Now, how many years does it take many of us to undo all of that cultural conditioning, from yoga classes to mindfulness classes, everything, to get back in the now? Our kids have never had that robbed of them. They've always been in that moment. They're children when they're children, not children preparing for adulthood. I have this funny analogy that I use, that if we had to live like children do now as adults, we'd be preparing for retirement. What if we had to go to school, like classes every day for like 8 hours about retirement classes? Like, this is what it's going to be like. And you had to take tests and quizzes and memorize all these things about retirement, and how fulfilling would our lives be as adults if we were in constant preparation for our years when we're older. And so children that are living an unschooling life get to be in the moment more than any other group of kids I've ever seen. Actually, it's just beautiful. So yes, my kids have always dove into their passions, and sometimes they last weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. And they learn that this is how human beings live.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you guys, but when I was anything I've been into, that's all I want to do with my spare time. We have responsibilities as adults, so we can't do that. But kids do have the time to do that 24/7. As they get older and they have more responsibilities, they learn that the responsibilities are important, but they also learn that these passions and interests are so important in life to find out who we want to be and who we're growing to be. And so some of my kids' passions, they're making a living with now, and some they're fleeting interests that kind of they pass through like a phase. But yeah, I'm very grateful for their freedom, for sure.
So you're
So
saying they know how to be in the present moment?
Yeah. Yes.
They haven't been conditioned out of that like the rest of us?
Yeah. It's not that they
Wow.
don't think about things sometimes. I mean, they're human beings that know Ryan thinking about his surgery in 3 weeks. He's thinking about that, but he's more able to be in the present moment than I would have. I would have so much anxiety if I was in his shoes at this stage, just constantly worrying about the future, because I was so conditioned to that. I think it's a much healthier mental space for kids who are allowed to have freedom and to do what they want with their time. I think the issue is many people think that kids wouldn't make good choices if given freedom, that they would do things that would harm themselves, that they need adults to control them or else they're going to really hurt themselves. And I found that to be the case even with some seasoned unschoolers. They get scared when their kids are staying up till 3 a.m. and using technology, or eating a lot of foods that the parents think they shouldn't. But the thing is, when you let your child be in that space and support them and give them information, that they just move through it quickly. They realize that some things don't really feel good in their body. They realize that going to bed earlier and sleeping through the night feels a little bit better the next day. But as a whole, my kids have always made really good choices.
Right, but sometimes it doesn't look that way.
No.
Mhm. And when you
Yeah.
start out, it must be so scary to start out with a young child and just like kind of take the, the path that nobody else takes, and try to find, because I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I guess you would just offer you would just do life together, and you'd offer a whole bunch of experiences, and you'd see what sticks. And, it's like it being if you stay at home with your kids and you kind of just do your day, and they kind of lead. Obviously, after a while, you notice, if you're paying attention, you see what it is that they are drawn to, and then you try to provide ways that they can engage with it, and more. And I can kind of see it just organically unfolding. What gets in the way is our fears.
Yeah, definitely. And also to realize that we need to go through a process called deschooling. And what that means is to decondition ourselves as seeing things in schooly terms and schooly ways through like schooly lenses. certain things as being valuable to learn. For example, we don't break life down into subjects. I've never said this is math, English, science, history, ever. We've just lived life, because in the real world, nothing is broken down like that.
Mhm.
However, if you were to take their interests and break it down into subjects, you would see that the way that I've facilitated things, to the best of my ability, has touched on all these things. For example, when Devin was 4, he was really into Legos. He loved them. And so to facilitate his passion, his interest, I call it the nucleus of their learning, is that whatever their interest is. And so I subscribed to Lego magazine. I brought him to a Lego exhibit that touched, and when I lived in New Hampshire, it was the mills, like a mill town in New Hampshire. So they was all built up in Legos. That was history. We baked a Lego cake. That was math. He had to measure. So I would facilitate his interest, his desire to read what was in the magazine. I would read it to him. That's English. So you'd see the way I facilitated, and that's just one example out of hundreds with my kids. So on the surface, it might look like it's not valuable. You know, Ivy's interest when she was 11 in The Walking Dead, who would have ever thought? They'd be like, ooh, that's so damaging. The way that we facilitated it, again, subscribe to Walking Dead magazine. Can you believe there is a Walking Dead magazine? Brought her to meet Chandler Riggs, one of the stars of the show, when they came to Boston, drove 3 hours so she could meet somebody part of the show and ask questions. And so when my kids have an interest in something, you just dive into it and say, what resources in the world can I bring to them to want to learn more about this interest with all these different tools? And all tools are, if you were to look at them, it's math, English, science, they're all broken down into subjects. So our kids learn these tools, reading, writing, math, as a side effect of wanting to learn more about what they're interested in. This doesn't ever have to be forced. What kids wouldn't want to learn how to read, write, and do math if they're tools to help them get more of what they want and learn more about what they're really into? Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah,
A lot
also,
of
well, like the internet, obviously everyone's so triggered about screen time, blah, blah, blah. Like it's an obsession. But like, you know, my daughter is into Instagram. She's a private account with her friends and stuff. And they like make the most amazing videos, and she's so good at editing, and she's acting, and they're dancing, and they're doing music, and I mean she's better at technology, way beyond. She can pick up anything, you know, because they're born into it. But if I judged that and wouldn't let her do it, she would not have been able to develop those skills. She's just naturally a great filmmaker. Like she thinks of themes and storylines. I mean, they just made her and her friends just made a horror film the other day just for fun. It came out so good. And it's really funny too. And then, you know, and then they do different shots and different angles. They have the music, and you know, and it's like those are the kinds of things when you're unschooling, you say yes, and then you see all the things are broken down. Because the way you describe it, Dayna, people would think, oh God, I don't know how to do that I can't facilitate anything for my kid. I'm not good like that. But you don't have to be. It's all built into life. You just learn all these layers of things when you're living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really not, it's just a shift in your mind to how would you facilitate anything for somebody you love? If you take it, say it's for your mother, your best friend, your partner, when you love them, what do you do? If they're into something, oh, my husband likes to cook, maybe I'll book him the special cooking class as a surprise. Like that's facilitating somebody's learning. Yeah. You just do that with your kids. When you love somebody, facilitating what they love, instead of thinking of it, I think we get caught in the term learning. We're like, oh gosh, I have to be a teacher. How can I facilitate her learning more? Instead, just be easy on yourself and say, oh, but what would she? Oh, she probably love Lego magazine. She'd probably love Walking Dead, a book about the Walking Dead, or maybe they love a cheat code book for Minecraft. Just what would you get them for Christmas based on what they love? And pull that into everyday life. And it becomes so easy. You can't keep a child from learning if you tried.
Yeah.
Everybody's so worried about it. Like, how are they going to learn to read? I have never known an unschooler in 25 years. And I know many hundreds of adult unschoolers now that have always been raised this way. I don't know any that don't know how to read. None of them are sitting in their basement playing video games. You know why? Because they had the freedom to do that in childhood.
Right.
Yeah. And so why would they do it in adulthood? They got it out of their system. They play, you know, they grow into more responsibilities. And it's all this fear of the future that people are putting on us when we're walking this path. That how are they ever going to X, Y, Z? How are they ever going to want to do this? How are they ever going to want to do that? It's like, trust me, they will. And they do. So the hardest thing about this life for parents is just trusting the process.
Yeah.
Stop trying to control. Whenever we're in fear, we want to control. So part of what I do as a coach is helping parents eliminate the fears surrounding this, really touching on that. Where's that fear coming from? Some of the fears are due to our own childhood trauma, our upbringing. And a lot of it is just such like unbalanced, unregulated emotions of fear surrounding these things. So when we bring a lot of the facts to the history of public education, we need to educate parents about how this all started. When did all of this happen? When people thought children had to be forced, and why was it done that way? And so it's kind of the same as a childbirth teacher and doula. I train doulas. That's another thing that I love to do, another passion of mine. And it's so important to educate doulas about the history of childbirth and how it moved into the hospital. Because once they understand the intentions of all of this, they go, oh, okay, I thought that was for safety. I thought that was because of the XYZ. And now I see that it was just because of control in some aspects and because of money. You know, when you learn that the history of like forced learning is because of the Russian system of trying to create factory workers, you're like, oh, okay, so it wasn't for the good of the child. This wasn't a necessity. This was because of this. Then it makes more sense for parents. So part of what I do is educate parents about the history of oppressive child rearing practices and why they came to be. And so once they understand that, they're so much able to step into their own inner knowing. And a lot of what we do, I don't know if you'll agree with me, but part of what I do is I like to tell parents, you knew this all along. You knew this when you were 3. You were just, you lost trust in yourself, but you knew a long time ago that, that this was, that you were a good person and that you were to be trusted. And helping parents rekindle and reawaken that inner knowing is something that I love to do for people, because this isn't something that we might be educating parents about this, but what we're doing is really giving them permission on something they knew long ago that was really pushed down and not allowed to flourish when they were younger.
My mind translates a lot of this into therapeutic
Yeah.
framework. You too, Kara?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
some of what I'm noticing is our non-coercive collaborative thing. And then we're both trauma, like we work with trauma clients, and the way that they're constantly, those things are interacting.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of times parents cannot come out of their patterns until they are really dealing with their traumas.
Yeah.
And I know that's like not your thing. So when you ask people to really examine their intentions, does it just happen naturally?
For some people. Yeah. I mean, I'm not, obviously I'm not a therapist, but I think something that I like to do is hold space for people and in their realizations. I think change happens when people are aware of why they do what they do.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's enough to help with a shift. Obviously, people go on, if they have a lot of trauma, to go on to seek therapy. And that's a wonderful tool. It's so important to do that. But just bringing it to people's awareness that, oh, do you realize that part of why you're feeling that is because you were forced to do that, or you were led to believe that this was essential, but it's not. And if they say, well, how do I get over that? Well, therapy's good,
Yeah.
So I can guide people in different directions, but it's through awareness of thought patterns, like unhealthy thought patterns, I think that we can make change.
I mean, this is childism or adultism. Like this is taking apart oppression to children, just like you take apart racism and sexism and transphobia. It's the same process where your brain has to understand the power dynamic and how it was built to control people for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
And now it's children, right? And everyone agrees we should just oppress children because we can, because they can't really fight back.
Yeah, children are the most oppressed people in our culture. So many children, and they're all treated as less than. And it's hard once that veil is lifted and you're seeing things differently. I think it's really painful for people to come to this philosophy sometimes, because a lot of times you ask somebody like, how was your childhood? Oh, it was great. But then when you share this philosophy, all of a sudden they're looking back going, oh, it's really painful sometimes for people to look back on their own childhood as being even abusive, because control is abusive in some extreme ways. I mean, it's controlling another human being is not respectful at the very least, abusive at the worst. And in order for people to accept this philosophy, they oftentimes have to look back and look differently at their memories.
Right.
They're looking at, wow, but a lot of times the pain that will come with that is more than people can handle. So sometimes if people aren't ready to accept this philosophy, it's because they aren't ready to look at their childhood the way it really was. They want to believe all of these things that, oh, my parent did it because they love me. It's hard to look back.
Yeah.
And to say, wow, why didn't my parents do differently? They didn't have to live this way. So when you look back and you say, no, I didn't have to live the way that I did now, I realized that wasn't necessary to be punished and controlled and abused. But then we want to bring in the other piece for parents that, I mean, not all the time, because there are extreme cases where somebody was really abused, but sometimes parents did the best they could with what they knew if it came to parenting in the authoritarian paradigm. Punishing was all a parent knew. And so I think that's what a lot of adults, parents are trapped in today, is not knowing tools. And so that's what we can bring them, the different tools and the ways to look at things differently. And just like, what do you do instead of commenting on everything your children are doing? To say to a parent, just hold space and be present. And try to work through your need to control. Sometimes from the outside looking in, it looks like you're not doing anything, but you're doing so much inside.
I mean, I've been doing this work consciously for almost, I guess, 8 years maybe. And I still have to bite my tongue. I almost, everything I'm about to say, I have to think about it first, because a lot of times it would be much better if I didn't say it.
Yeah.
Even now, even after all this time of practicing this, I'll be like, why would I say that? And how do I think she would take that? Actually, this doesn't sound very loving. And why do I even need to say that? Do I even need, like you were saying, do I even need to comment on that? Yeah.
I mean, there's authentic, and there is a big difference, isn't there, in the intention of some words. So words can sound the same. They could be the same words, but the intention is something we have to be thinking about too. Like, if a parent is authentically seeing something their child does, and they're like, wow, that's awesome. That's so cool. I love that you did that. That's a lot different than saying, I want more of that behavior, so I'm going to say, good job. So they keep doing it to please me, and I get more of that behavior. That intention's for my own needs of obedience, or to be pleased. And so two things from the outside looking in can sound similar, but what is the intention of me doing it?
Yeah.
So authentic communication, I think, is so important. And that's not something that's promoted with traditional authoritarian, parenting. And so coming at it from an authentic place is important. And being able to apologize to your child if you do say something. Say, oh, I'm sorry, that sounded bad, or I didn't mean to say that. I'm sorry. Being organic in your communication of wow, this is the first time I've ever parented an 8-year-old. Wow, sorry about that. That was not cool. I shouldn't have said that to you. And I'm tired, or I'm hungry, and explaining things. Yeah. I think in my Mother's Day, our Parents' Day, that parents were told not to let their children see them vulnerable because they'd manipulate. Right. Like when I brought Devin home from the hospital the first time, and my mother-in-law said, don't pick him up when he's crying right away. I'll manipulate you. I want you to do that all the time. I can remember hearing those words and thinking, how can this little being, why would he even be thinking about me? How could he possibly be thinking to manipulate me? He's not. And I knew right then how wrong that was. We have to trust our children and love them, and not assume negative intent. That's another really big part of my work, is this assumption that our culture has, not just with children, but when it comes to children, assuming negative intent, assuming manipulation. If you're approaching parenting assuming manipulation, or they're pushing your buttons, that's so self-focused. Yeah. That is so narcissistic to think everything your child's doing is somehow to manipulate you or about you at all. It's not even about you. They're individuals. Why are we perceiving everything our kids are doing as somehow about us? That's why we want to kind of pull away from always commenting and making them hyper focused on our approval and pleasing us, or manipulating us. They're not. They're individuals. They're thinking of themselves. So I knew that was wrong from the moment I heard that he's going to manipulate you. I knew that's crazy. He's not thinking about how to manipulate me as this little innocent being. And as time went on, I realized that so much of parenting is assuming negative intent from kids, parenting education. So even making that little shift of assuming positive intent and knowing your children are doing the best they can with what they know at the time. those little tweaks change the relationship so much. So I really encourage you to like assume positive intent from your kids and knowing they're doing the best they can with what they know and approaching it from that place.
Dayna, I'm just so blown away by you and your the fact that you also have 4 kids. I have one, little one. And it's just, it feels so hard to be surrounded by people who just think so differently all the time. I mean, I have no community. Talk about it a lot on the show. People are messaging me like, I'm also have a toddler, like let's connect, which is wonderful, but there's nothing like having just, people surrounding you, a community, a village, places to connect in real life, places to bring your kid where you don't feel like you're on edge all the time because of their behavior. And it's just so hard, and it's just so amazing to hear you talk about doing this for so long, for advocating for so long, and also with 4 kids. And I'm inspired because I would love to have a bunch of kids, and I hope I will.
You get better at it. The first one, it's hard. Then
Yeah.
the second one, it's hard. But then you're like, wow, I got this down.
Yeah.
And then they start entertaining each other, playing with each other. And you're like, this is really awesome. And you get better at it, like anything. You get better at parenting. But we're always learning and growing. And for me, I never wanted my work, my advocacy life to be separate from my kids. I didn't want to have to look at it like work at all. And so anytime I was asked to speak somewhere, my kids always had the freedom to come with me or not anywhere. So my kids have traveled the world with me as an advocate. And also anytime I'm doing any work supporting others online or writing, if they need me, that's my priority. Like I'll just stop what I'm doing and help them. And so balancing work and advocacy and family, I don't want to compartmentalize it and need to separate it. So to me, it's just life, my work, my advocacy, my parenting, everything is just how I've always lived. And I think it can be that way for many people. They're just so used to compartmentalizing and separating everything. They're like, how do I get work done at home with kids? Well, you just go with the flow. When there's a moment to work, you take advantage of that and you do it. But if your kids need you, you have to be living this philosophy in order to advocate for it. So at your stage, I didn't know if I could have more either. I'm serious, because it's
Really?
a lot.
Because you had a couple close in age, right? At the beginning.
Well, I think 2.5 years apart. I think
2.5 years. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just love to hear from people who've been doing it, their kids are grown up, and they talk about like, you get through it and you get better at it. It never gets old for me. I always love to hear it. And I always love to like voice just my kind of appreciation to like look to people like you who are in a way, on another planet from me. And it's just like, okay, there's hope. I can do this.
You can. I mean, we have to do hard things to grow and to learn more to help others. So for me as an advocate from the beginning, when something was hard, I'd say, well, I know I'm going to be able to help somebody on the other side of this. So yeah, it hasn't been easy. You do it. And once you get through it, you're stronger and you're a whole different woman. And you're like, I'm able to help people so much more. So these life lessons of really, really hard things of going from 1 to 2 kids or from 2 to 3, this is exactly what helps us grow. What we need to grow as people that support other people.
Well, also when you go from coercion to non-coercion, when you go from control to collaboration, I try to talk about this a lot in my videos. There's like this flow and this organic connection that takes over. It's just like a completely different organism than when you're trying to control everybody and yourself, and that, it's a completely different energy. And it starts to have its own, it does you. It's like your life starts living through you. It's so wonderful.
Yeah, it's a lot easier than most people think. Like when people hear I have 4 kids, they're blown away, but it's like, yeah, but life is happy most of the time. It's not like I'm controlling people all day, every day. I couldn't do that. Like people will ask me like, how do you homeschool? Oh gosh, I have such a hard time as it is. I can't imagine having to force them to learn too. And I'm like, yeah, we've never lived like that. My kids have never been forced to do anything. Isn't that crazy? When people first hear that, they're like, wow, your house must be, my kids have never been forced to do anything in their lives, ever. They've never been held down to brush their teeth. They've never, been forced to do any schoolwork ever, but yet they're successful adults and they're happy. And they have life experience in so many ways that kids traditionally don't. And so this works. You do not have to live a miserable life controlling another being all day, every day to have successful human beings. And that's like the lie that we need to break down.
Wow. Would you say a little bit about before we go about how your kids are, a bit about them and a bit about where you're at now?
So how people can
Sure.
find you.
Yeah.
Sure. So my son Devin, who's 25, he has a career of he does so much, but he does landscaping, organic gardening. He's really into permaculture. That's a big part of his life. My daughter Tiffany, who's 23, so funny, never expected that she's an influencer. That's what she does for a living. And she has companies contact her like every day to promote their stuff. She makes really good money, which is a side effect of her living her passion. So she does that. She's also she's really big into fashion. Does nails. She does everything beauty. That's her career. And my daughter Ivy is an animal activist. She runs an animal rescue, and right now she's looking into breeding endangered snakes. So facilitating that passion's been fun. My entire garage is a guinea pig rescue, and now we're taking on endangered snakes. But that's like who she is. She works at a larger animal rescue. And so my kids, and my son Orion is a programmer, and he's also learning piano. So he's a musician. Well, I don't know if you would call him a musician yet. He would criticize me for calling him that, but I think he's a musician. But no, he's doing amazing things too. So they're all so different. Like every single one of my kids is doing something so totally different than the other, that I think that when we raise kids all in one paradigm just to please us, they tend to stick with careers that look similar. Yeah. But my kids are living their passions and making money off of their passions in every way.
And living authentically to who they really are.
Yes. And the funny thing is, they're all so different. Like Devin he just got some rabbits. He wants to breed rabbits, and wants to do all kinds of things that are so different than what Ivy would support, because Ivy's an animal activist. Like Devin's like kind of like a prepper. He's like, well, just in case, we should raise rabbits and we could sell the pelts and raise them for meat. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about this, and we could do this. And supporting and facilitating things that go outside the range of what I would be comfortable with is something I've had to grow with as a parent. Now, Ivy is an animal activist. She's vegan. I was vegan for 14 years until about a year ago. But Ivy is still holding space for Devin in his passions. And they're so close despite having such different belief systems. And I think that that's something that we model through living this life. It's a wonderful side effect of respecting your kids as individuals and not raising them with the same curriculum, the same ideas. And in school, if kids are in school, they're so, even no matter how open-minded you are as a parent, sometimes they do pick up a lot of closed-minded, very disrespectful, oppressive ideas. And although my daughter Ivy is vegan, she fully supports Devin and loves him so much. And I've seen that their belief systems are so different. Devin's Christian. I'd say she's agnostic. And we're the closest family with the most different ideas. That to me is what I think is a mini microcosm of world peace.
Yeah.
And it's working. And it's mind blowing. And this is what I want to write about, because people wouldn't believe me. And I having communication, me asking Ivy, like, how do you feel about the bunnies being raised if Devin wants to raise them for meat? We haven't got to that point, but she's like, I'm not happy about it, but I know I understand why he's doing it. Wow. And so there's people on each end that would say, how could you let your kids do that? And it's like, well, I wasn't expecting to go down this path with them, but here we are. And I need to grow as a person. I need to let go of my own biases, my own agendas. And I think that my kids have been the greatest teacher of me being who I am today. I had some really strong ideas about certain things that I have grown with, thanks to my children, because you know what? There is no agenda that comes before my children, no matter what. Like, I've had vegan activists say to me, how could you let your sons eat meat? And it's like, because they're my agenda. They are nothing else. So yes, I have belief systems and I have ideas and I have things that I'm living, but my children and their freedom and their choice and their growth and who they are will always be first and foremost. So, and it's working. And there's no life that I would never go back and say, I wish I did things different. Out of anything I've done in my life, out of any mistakes I've made, the one thing I will always hold on to is being the greatest decision. And thank God I had the courage to do it, is to parent them this way.
Thank you so much, Dayna. Would
You're
you
welcome.
say briefly, so we can put it in at the end, where everybody can find you?
Sure. Okay, so I'm on social media, on Instagram, official Dayna Martin, Dayna Martin. I'm on Facebook, my group you can join on Facebook. And I also have a private group if you go to radicalunschooling.com, where you can join it's a subscription for $5 a month. Really, really worth it to get group coaching, all my books, my ebooks are on there, all articles, lots of content, and a really supportive, loving community. So I also offer coaching. If you go to daynamartin.com, you'll see a lot of different resources too. So you can see, I also train people to be doulas, and I recently started a program where I train people to be advocates. So if you're interested in advocating for this life, to learn how you can travel and speak and coach, certify people in every area of advocacy, that's a really powerful, really getting to be a very popular group as well. So my advocacy programs through daynamartin.com. So you'll find me. I'm out there in many different places. I'm on TikTok too, but I don't do a lot with it yet. All right. Well, thank you, Leigh. So nice to meet you, Kara. You guys take care.
Thank you so much, Dayna.
Anytime.
Hopefully we'll be in touch.
Thank you. I'm always willing to come on.
Yeah,
Anytime.
thanks so much.
You need someone. Okay, so take care. Much love to you.
This has been Your Kids Don't Suck. You can find me, Kara Tedstone, at www.karatedstonetherapy.com and on Instagram at Kara Tedstone Therapy. On my website, you'll find links to recommended readings and a link to my Reparenting with Mindfulness workbook, available now on Amazon.
You can find me, Rythea Lee, at www.rythea.com. That's RYTHEA.com. There you'll find published books, articles, and music, and parenting videos. Also, I'm on TikTok at Rythea Lee, on Instagram at Rythea Lee. You can book parent mentoring sessions with me through my website. And also I have an Advice from a Loving Bitch YouTube show that helps people heal self-hatred, and that's rythea.com/advice. It is important and essential to put our voices, Rythea and Kara, in a context. We are two white, cisgendered, straight, middle-class women living with financial and societal privilege. Because of this, our perspectives are limited and do not reflect the realities of all of our listeners. This podcast will feature guests with expertise around conscious parenting who differ in race, class, abilities, sexual orientation, and histories from us, to broaden the conversation and reflect the lives of as many people as possible. 25% of the proceeds of this podcast will go to creators of color who have been mentors and influences on our work and in our growth as parents.
If you like our show, please subscribe and stay tuned for more conscious parenting advice and insights. And check out our link tree at linktr.ee/yourkidsdon'tsuck to donate and connect with us.